All right. We are going to give it a quick minute and let some people tune in. But, guys, today we are answering an age old question. We are answering a very important question on the podcast. We are talking about the right way to structure your training week. Now, the reason I wanted to do this one is because I get this question very, very, very often, and I give a pretty similar answer every time. Appreciate you all as you tune in. But yeah, so we're going to get into that a little bit deeper. And we're going to go right away. But if you're tuning in on Instagram, make sure you stick around because we are going to do some Q&A at the end of the podcast. So stick around to the end. Make sure you're here and we can answer some questions at the end. But let's go right away. We're going to talk about the right way to structure your training week. And we're going to talk about it in 3, 2, 1. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Elite Development Podcast, the #1 show for athletes looking to gain an edge on their opponents and build their dream careers in sport. I am your host, Kenny Dusseault, and today we are talking about the right way to structure your training week. Now, first off, the reason that I wanted to bring this one to you guys is because I get this question a lot. I have X amount of sessions per week, and I'm doing my strength and conditioning sessions at these times, doing it like this. Is that enough? Is that too much? Am I doing it right? Is there a better way to do it? So I figured, you know what? Let's break it down. So we're going to break it down into a couple of different questions, a few different questions. So the first question is we're going to break it down to figure out if you're training enough. The second thing we're going to break down is if you're training too much. And the third thing we're going to break down is what goes on what training days. So make sure you're sticking around because this is going to be a good one. We are going to get into a lot of things that I know are going to help a lot of people. So number one, are you training enough? So that is definitely one of the most common questions I get is, people send me their training schedule, be like, am I doing enough or should I be doing more? And a lot of the time when people ask this, they're almost looking for me to say you should be doing more. But the reason that I don't is because we need to come back to the actual goal of training. And the actual goal of training, obviously, I talk about this a lot, is to succeed when you compete. But more so than that, one of the main goals of training is to improve in your training, right? If you're training a sport, the goal is to get better at the sport so that you can succeed when you compete. Make sense? So the goal to figure out if you're training enough is very, very simple. Are you getting better? It's literally that. If you're getting better, then you are doing enough. Now, does that mean that you can't do any more? No, but you're doing enough. Because if you are not getting better, then that tells me you're not practicing enough. You're not improving. You're not doing enough work to see any kind of improvement. But if you are seeing improvement, you're training enough. Now, how much improvement you want to see is going to be a factor on whether or not the amount you're doing right now is enough or whether you need to start adding more. But it is really that simple. Are you seeing improvement? Yes. Cool. Your training's on the right track. So the next question now, this is where it gets a little more complicated, is are you training too much? And the things to watch for here when it comes to training too much, number one is burnout, because this is a very common thing amongst athletes. And a lot of athletes, I don't even think really realize that they're feeling it as they start to feel it. But basically when it comes to burnout, guys, the things you need to watch for, number one is if you're waking up in the morning and the last thing in the world you want to do is train. If that happens every once in a while, that's just a normal part of being an athlete. But if you're starting to see, you're like, man, I'm waking up 2, 3, 4 days in a row, and the last thing in the world I want to do is go to my training session today, the chances are you're a little bit burnt out. And if you're a little bit burnt out, that doesn't mean you need to quit. That doesn't mean you need to take a month off. That means you're probably just training a little too much. Because if you follow me for any period of time, you've heard me use the expression better, more doesn't equal better. And that is a plain symptom of it. If you hit the point where you hate going to the gym because you for whatever reason, you're not enjoying it anymore, you're not finding the fun in it anymore, you're just doing too much. You need to back off of it a little bit. Backing off a little bit isn't going to ruin your progress. Backing off of it a little bit is going to make you actually start enjoying it again. And I can tell you one thing, if you enjoy it, you're going to get more out of it. And if you get more out of it, you're going to get a better result, even if it's in less time. You guys get what I'm saying? Like, I know you could not have paid me enough money to sit in a classroom and study and, do my best to get good grades. I hated every minute of that part of school. Whereas when it came to studying strength and conditioning stuff, you can't get me away from it, right? Because I enjoy it. I love it. It's the thing I actually am passionate about doing. You get what I'm saying? So like sticking me in a classroom and forcing me to study more wasn't going to make me all of a sudden be a great student. I just didn't like school. So I didn't want to be there. So if you stuck me in a classroom for longer, I fucked off for most of the time. But when it comes to something that I'm actually passionate about, I don't need to spend as much time reading or watching strength and conditioning videos because I'm invested. I'm going to get it on the first try. When I read about a new concept, I'm going to understand it pretty quickly because I actually want to understand it. I actually want to learn it, right? So when you're invested in something, when you're enjoying something, when you find the love in something, you're going to get better results in it a lot faster than if it's something that you're not enjoying doing. So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to burnout, the things that you got to watch for is if you're at training and you feel like it's taking you more and more and more tries to improve on a certain technique. So this doesn't mean that you should get all your techniques right away. Obviously, there's, skill levels involved. There's things that you need to work on, all of that. But if you're working on a certain combination or a certain technique in the gym and you feel like your coach is telling you the same thing and you just can't get it, that doesn't mean that you're getting worse. It doesn't mean you're a bad athlete. It doesn't mean you're not listening. The chances are your brain is just a little burnt out, so you're not taking in the instruction the same way. So by just giving yourself a little bit of time off, even a day or two, you're going to let yourself recharge a little more, get yourself feeling better, and in turn, get yourself back to the point of feeling good and being able to train at 100%. And then the final thing when it comes to figuring out if you're training too much, figuring out if you're burning out, is injury. Obviously, when it comes to combat sports, especially, there's always going to be bumps and bruises. You're always going to wake up in the morning a little sore, kicked an elbow and the foot hurts a little bit, or something's a little swollen, or something was a little bruised up. I'm not saying you're going to get away from that, as you probably shouldn't expect to. But if you feel like you have like an old nagging injury that keeps coming up and just not going away, what most people will say is, that's just part of the game. And like to an extent, yes. But what that also tells me is that you're not giving yourself the time you need to recover. Your body's never having the chance to heal. And because you've never had the chance to heal, the injury is sticking around, right? So these are all indications that you might be training a little too much. So when it comes to structuring your training week, if you start to feel like you're not taking in information really well from your coaches, you start to feel like you're just not enjoying being at the gym and training, and you're starting to feel like those nagging old injuries that you've got just aren't going away, what that's telling me is what you've got in your schedule right now is just a little too much. And so there's not a perfect way to, know exactly what to drop out, but try cutting out one of those sessions every week and see if your body starts feeling better. Maybe two of those sessions every week, see if your body starts feeling better. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is what goes into what days. So when it comes to training now, you got to ask yourself what goes into what days. And this is the final piece on, really how to schedule out your training session, this training program, the right way. And this is going to be contrary to what you're going to hear in a lot of places or what you're going to have a lot of coaches tell you. But the way you should be structuring your training to the best of your ability is structuring the hard days together and structuring the easy days together. So when I say easy days, I don't necessarily mean easy, but like a little bit lighter, more technical days, and then structuring your harder sessions on the same days as much as you can. So like a lot of people say like on sparring day, I don't want to do anything else. I just want to spar. Sparring day is actually one of the best days that you can do a strength and conditioning session. Why? Because if you have a good strength and conditioning coach, and yes, I'm kind of calling out some other coaches out there, but at the same time, just reinforcing that this is an important thing to be thinking about. If you have a good strength and conditioning coach, Your focus should be on rate of perceived exertion. So working your body at the level that you're able to on any given day, not working off of some magical number that it's like, no matter how you feel, you need to be able to hit this. And so if you go in on a sparring day, after sparring, a couple hours later, have something to eat, have something to drink, you do your strength and conditioning session. Your focus isn't, I need to hit record numbers every single time I'm in, but your focus is hit as good numbers as you can based off of how you're feeling. And the reason that's so important to do, and structuring the harder days together and structuring the easier days together, is because you need to give yourself losing my words, but you need to give yourself as much recovery time as possible to be able to get as much out of your sessions as possible. So if you have hard sessions on every single day, but let's say you have a hard and an easy session every single day, then what's going to happen is your body's never really recovering through the week. But let's say on Monday, you have 2 hard sessions. On Tuesday, you have a harder session and an easier session. On Wednesday, you have 2 easier sessions. On Thursday, you have 2 hard sessions. And then on Friday, you have 2 hard sessions. And then on Saturday, you just have 1, right? You're still getting in a lot of hard training. You're still making a lot of improvements. But that Wednesday, 2 easier sessions or 2 lighter technical sessions, your body's going to be able to recover more. And if your body's able to recover more, then Thursday, Friday, the harder days of your week, you're going to have more energy for those. You're going to be better recovered for those. You're going to be able to get more out of those, right? Whereas if it's just hard sessions every single time, every day through the week, your body's just getting steadily more beat up as the week goes on. You're never fully recovering during the week. And in turn, you're getting less out of your week than you could. Is that all making sense? I hope that hits. I hope that made you think a little bit about the way that you're training right now. So the final piece I want to talk about with this, and the thing that I really hope kind of wraps it up, is that the best way to structure out your week is to do what you can with what you've got. Because I've given you a couple of things here. I've given you a couple of ideas to think about. I've given you a couple of, guidelines, I hope, to, really give yourself a feeling if you're training the right way, if your training needs work or anything like that. But the main thing you've got to understand is you need to do what you can with what you've got. So as an example, structuring those hard sessions all on the same day. If you're working a full-time labor job, like let's say you're working 10 hours a day outside, lifting heavy things, moving heavy things around, whatever it is, you should not be doing 2 hard sessions a day on top of that. And the reason you shouldn't is because in your head, you might be thinking, oh, I'm falling further behind because I'm not doing as many training hours as this guy or that guy. But the problem is, we come back all the way to the beginning of the podcast. What is the goal of training? Is to see consistent improvement, to succeed when you compete. And if you're working outside for 10 hours a day, on top of doing a hard session in the morning and a hard session in the evening every single day, you're beating the fuck out of your body. And if you're beating the fuck out of your body, you might be showing up for training every day, but you're not really getting a lot out of training every day. And if you're not getting that as much out of training every day, you might be putting in more hours, but you're beating up your body more. You're not getting as quick results as you need to. And as a result, you're putting in way more time to get way less result and beating up your body more. So if you have that other really hard thing during your day that you're doing for 8 to 10 hours or whatever it might be, instead of how do I load the most training I can on top of that, figure out what's going to actually feel good and what's going to actually allow you to continue to make steady improvements over time, given the schedule you have. You get what I'm saying? Now, the same kind of idea when it comes to, are you training too much or are you training too little? If your body's severely beat up from work, that level of training too much or too little is going to be very different than somebody who all they have to think about and all they have to do is train. Right? So especially in the beginning, like this becomes a different discussion when you aren't working a full-time job and you're able to just focus on your sport. But when you're working a full-time job, you're living all these different pieces of life all together. And then you also have to think about training full-time, also have to think about fighting, competing, whatever else it is. You've got to understand that your training is going to look different. Just because that guy that's in the UFC is training 3 times a day, it doesn't mean you should if you're working a labor job outside for 10 hours a day. You get what I mean? So the absolute best piece of advice, going on top of everything we've talked about here, is when it comes to building out your training schedule, you've got to understand that it comes down to doing the best you can with what you've got. Whatever restrictions you have in life, I talk a lot about, figuring out how to get out of the shitty job that doesn't allow you to train, those kind of things. But whatever restrictions you have right now on your training schedule, you've got to understand that those are real and you need to do the most you can with them, not just try to forcibly train around them and not let them slow you down, because those things are real and they're going to have an effect. So guys, I hope you got some value from that. That's it. That's all. I hope you got some value from that. I hope you learned something. If you did, I would love to know what it is. Make sure to shoot me a message on any of my social media platforms. The notes on how to do that will be in the show notes below. As always, I appreciate you. I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in, and I will talk to you on the next episode. All right, and guys, we're going to stick around on Instagram for a little bit of Q&A. So if you are here live, make sure that you drop any questions that you've got in the chat, and I will get to them as they